Everyone, my name is Dylan Hosier from ICANN, the Israeli American Civic Action Network. I want to thank you for joining us for our special Tisha B'Av program, Destruction of Life, Destruction of Truth, where we'll explore contemporary Holocaust distortion and denial. Tonight, joining me as co-host is Rabbi Denny Secker from Congregation Kol Ami, along with Rabbi Max Chaikin, Mayor of West Hollywood, Lindsay P. Horvath, and our special speakers, Grant Gochin and Silvia Foti. For now, I'll hand it off to you, Rabbi Egger, to share some thoughts about tonight's special holiday.
Thank you so much, Dylan. Welcome, everybody. We're so pleased that you're here with us to observe this sacred moment. In the Jewish calendar, it is the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av. It is the National Jewish Day of Mourning, where we remember the times in Jewish history when the Jewish people were under tragic circumstances, particularly the destruction of Solomon's temple, the first temple in 586 by the Babylonians, and then in the year 70 CE by the Romans. And many tragic moments have happened to the Jewish people on this date, including the Spanish Inquisition, the start of World War I, and in many times in the Jewish world, we do remember the horrors of the Shoah, the horrors of the Holocaust. And so tonight we're honored that Mayor Lindsay Horvath from the city of West Hollywood is with us to offer us words of consolation, comfort, and inspiration. Mayor?
Thank you so much, Rabbi. It's an honor to be with you all tonight and always to be in the presence of the great work that's done by Congregation Kol Ami as well as ICANN. And I thank you for the invitation to join you. As you said tonight, we remember the destruction of the temple, and in thinking about that in the context of all we're experiencing in our country today and in society today, I was called to think about the concept of accountability. And as a mayor, as you might imagine, I might have a unique understanding of accountability. Many times people think of mayors holding people accountable to laws, or perhaps you think about holding me accountable to the things that you want to see happening in your community. But as a community, and especially a community of believers, thinking about what does accountability mean in that context, and how do we hold ourselves accountable to one another and to the values that we uphold and that we have guiding our lives each and every day. How do we hold space to remember our past so we are accountable to not repeating it? And how do we live in community with people we want to hold accountable without living in anger or vengeance or resentment towards one another? And more importantly, how do we live in community with people so we're able to build the community that we're proud of and that we wish to be a part of, the community that we wish to see and to build in the world. And so that's what tonight's conversation is all about. And you'll hear from the two special guests you have tonight. And I'm so excited for this conversation. Sylvia in particular, we want to thank you for your work. And I know the city has honored her for the work and leadership that she has done. But both of you have done such incredible and important work to not only hold us accountable to our past, but to create a new path of opportunity in creating our future together and making sure that we never forget the horrors and the tragedies that have been committed in the past, but to building anew and creating community that supports and uplifts and is life-giving. And so thank you all for having me tonight. And I'll now turn it over back to the Rabbi. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, so much for being with us and for your continual work that we all do together to strengthen our city and strengthen our neighborly ties with one another. We appreciate all you do. Friends, tonight as we enter our program and begin to try to remember how we can tell the truth, even in the face of tragedy, we take time to remember the words sung by those who were in the ghettos and the camps, words of Jewish tradition, Ani Ma'amin, the words of Maimonides, I believe with perfect faith in the coming of the Messianic time. Rabbi Chaikin.
Ani maamin, ani maamin, ani maamin באמונה שלמה, באמונה שלמה בביאת המשיח, בביאת המשיח אני מאמין, ואף על פי שיתמהמה, עם כל זה אני מאמין. The words resonate beautifully with what you shared with us, Mayor. This idea that we can be builders, because in our Reformed tradition, we think of the Mashiach, of the Messianic time, as a time that we all have to help bring about by telling the truth and helping make sure that we live our value of never again. We are helping to bring that about. We are acting on our belief. We'll sing one more time, and if you know the melody, I hope you'll sing along with me at home. Ani maamin, ani maamin, ani maamin באמונה שלמה, באמונה שלמה בביאת המשיח, בביאת המשיח אני מאמין, ואף על פי שנתמהמה, עם כל זה אני מאמין.
It's traditional on Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, to give voice to our sadness, to give voice to the pain. And before we have an empowering conversation with Sylvia and Grant about the scourge of Holocaust denial and the ways in which we can empower one another to, as Mayor Horvath said, to hold governments accountable for the atrocities of the past, we give voice now with a more modern version of a keynote, a more modern version of the Pain and Anguish. And this was written by colleagues of Rabbi Jenkins and I, Rabbi Benjamin Goldberg and Daniel Olson, to talk about the tragedy of the times that we're living in, with epidemics and pandemics and the sadness of the lack of truth that continues to abound in our world. Wail, O Zion, and her cities, as Torah's trapped in all of its arcs, and like its scroll left alone unread, each letter distant from her thirsty ones.
For the mourners of her families held back from her graves, and for the stricken nursing homes, spreaders of her diseases.
For the great ones of her Torah, their wisdom was lost from her learners, and for their blood that was spattered during intubation of her hospitalized ones.
For the breath of her babes, which was silenced in her schoolhouses, and for committees that distributed her ventilators.
For the elders of her community separated from her ones who visit, and for the sick ones who pray that they won't join her dead.
For the troubles of her parents who take care of her children all day, and for the arrogance of her consumers who rush her openings.
For brides who canceled weddings, her joys, and for the nights out in the city missing from her calendars.
For the closed and empty summer camps without the revelries of her campers, and for the infecting virus, the source of all these troubles of hers.
For the sharp, senseless hatred that strikes her marginalized ones, and for the essential workers who endangered themselves for her safety.
For her laid-off workers who hunger for her breads, and for the PPE not found with her healer.
For the voices of her scorners at the time of her increasing dead bodies, and for social distancing and the loneliness of her people.
For the mistakes with the tests that prolong her suffering, and for the prayers of her minions that were silenced in her prayer halls.
Wail, O Zion, and her cities, as Torah trapped in all of its arcs, and like its scroll left alone, unread, each letter distant from her thirsty ones. Together we say Amen. And now let us turn our program back to Dylan Hosier from ICANN, who's going to introduce our speakers and share words, hear their words of inspiration.
Thank you, Rabbi Egger, and thank you, Rabbi Jenkins. go ahead and bring in Grant Gochin and Silvia Foti. So again, thank you, Rabbi, for that amazing kickoff to this important event this evening. Tonight, we are going to speak about a story that is really so compelling. And this is our, I believe it's our second event in an ongoing series that we're hosting. So Grant and Sylvia, before we get started and hear more from you, I want to thank you for being here tonight. And again, Sylvia, I thank you especially for having the courage and tenacity to continue the work that you're doing. But before we dive into your respective stories, maybe you can give greetings and say hello to the audience and tell us a little bit about yourselves. Grant, go ahead.
Dylan, thank you. Rabbi, thank you as always. Mayor, thank you. Sylvia, it's great to see you. I think most people watching now know me. I'm a family man. I am Jewish. I'm gay. I'm American. I'm South African. I'm Lithuanian. I'm multiple identities. But my core identity is as a living, breathing Jew. And this is what drives me and motivates me and holds me accountable. Sylvia?
Thank you, Grant. Thank you, Rabbi Denise, for inviting us and hosting us. Dylan, it's great to see you as well. And Mayor, thank you for your lovely introduction. My name is Sylvia Foti. I'm in Chicago. I am a high school English teacher. Before that, I was a journalist for about 20 years. I'm a mother, and I am a practicing Catholic. And I'm delighted to be here to tell you the story of what I discovered about my grandfather, Jonas Naureke in Lithuania.
Great. So as we've done in the past and in previous events, we'll try to keep this conversational, and we'll keep it fast-paced. For those of you watching, we have a good sizable number watching live now on Facebook and YouTube. Go ahead and post questions in the comment section or comments in the comment section if you like. And we'll go ahead and take those as they come in. But Grant, why don't you kick us off and get us started? Tell us a little bit about how you began your research as a South African, researching in your family's history from Lithuania. How did you get started with all of this? Okay,
well, interestingly enough, Sylvia's and my family comes from pretty much the same village. 100 years ago, her great-grandfather must have met my great-grandfather in the market. The kids must have grown up in similar circumstances and similar. The families, our two families have been connected for over 100 years. And it's remarkable how that connection comes back into play today. So my family came from Lithuania. And as Rabbi Edgar will be able to tell you, I've been fascinated since I was a child about the family history. History as a general subject is my hobby. And I went to Lithuania many times. I've restored many cemeteries there. I've been politically active, socially active, Jewish active. And one day I was in my grandfather's village and we were standing over the death pits. Non-Jewish historian, and I said to her, who murdered my families? I mean, we trace back through the genealogy, we trace back at least 100 people that must be in these death pits. And it wasn't an order that came from Germany, because the Holocaust in Lithuania had been completed before Germany started their Holocaust. So I said, who pulled the trigger? Who rounded them up? who shoved them into these pits and murdered them, from the oldest to the newborn babies. The academic looked at me and she said it was a man by the name of Jonas Naureke. The name was meaningless to me. So I came back to the United States and I started researching the name. And the first trace that I could find on him was an article in Der Spiegel magazine in Germany in 1984 that identified him as the perpetrator. Now, 1984 was 6 years before Lithuania regained freedom from the Soviet Union. And so the data was public, the data was known to the Lithuanians as well, that this murderer was Jonas Naureke. And so I kept thinking, okay, what motivates a human being to go and murder their neighbor? Because the Jews lived together. I mean, Sylvia's family, my family, we lived, they could have been next door neighbors. What makes one neighbor go and grab their next door neighbor's child and murder them? So I started researching, and very interesting information. And then I discovered that Jonas Naureke is considered one of Lithuania's primary heroes. And I thought, this is just not possible. I mean, it's so widely known that he's this perpetrator. How could it ever be that a country considers somebody that was a mass genocidal murderer of other Lithuanians? Because even if we were Jews, we were Lithuanians. We'd been there for 700 years. Just as we're all Americans, whether we're Jewish Americans or Catholic Americans, we're Americans. The Jews in Lithuania had been there for 700 years. We were Lithuanians. So I thought, how could it be that the Lithuanian government would make a hero out of somebody that had murdered thousands of other Lithuanians before the mass murders had even started? So I thought, you know what, it's a mistake. And then I thought, okay, if I just approach them and tell them, look, guys, you've made this horrible mistake. You may want to know about it on the quiet and clean it up and take care of this and sweep it under the rug, and nobody needs to know that you mistakenly made a hero of him. Just remove the hero status. And I was stonewalled. And years of stonewalling. And it took me a long time to realize there's something really, really wrong over here. This isn't a mistake. They know about this. They're doing it deliberately. And there's something very wrong. So it's a very long story. Over many, many, many years, I came to the conclusion that there was no way to resolve this. So I thought, okay, the government won't. I appealed to the president and the prime minister and the parliament and the ombudsman. Dylan, is there feedback?
I think we're okay. Go ahead.
Okay, so I appealed to the president and the prime minister and the parliament and the ombudsman of the parliament and the heritage department and the mayor of the capital city, and just multiple government entities, and it was just universal stonewalling. So I thought, you know what, these people are all lying. The only way that I'm going to get this resolved is if I bring very crystal clear documented facts in front of an independent, impartial, intelligent judge that's going to look at this documentary evidence, eyewitness testimony, and say, what's going on here? Of course you need to revoke these honors.
And just so I can ask, what year is this?
I started on Naureke in about 2011.
2011, okay.
So I think my first lawsuit on this was probably 2016. I'd given up trying to get this resolved quietly through government channels. So I sued the government, and it got thrown out of court. And one of the government's positions was that they had a couple of very interesting positions. They said that I wasn't personally damaged by rewriting of history, so I had no standing to sue. They also said if they had to revise the facts as they had them, it was too expensive to reprint history textbooks. They came up with these remarkable defenses, but in every court case, they never looked at a single fact of the case. They never looked at a piece of evidence. They didn't look at the documents. They have, every single government department has refused to look at any of the facts in the case. So I sued them in the administrative court. I went to the administrative Supreme Court. They threw it out. I filed appeals with the criminal authorities, the public prosecutor. I filed 3 different appeals to charge the government with Holocaust denial. All 3 were refused. The status of my case now is we are in the civil courts. We've gone through the lower court. It was thrown out. We went through the appeals court. They threw it out. And I have 1 case left in Lithuania, the civil Supreme Court. And then we will have been through every government department, court, authority that could possibly be attached to this. And Lithuania will not address the facts of the matter. And in one of the cases, the government said to me, "We've done all of our research. In everything we've done, we don't acknowledge Naureke knew nothing, he saw nothing, he heard nothing. Tens of thousands of Jews were being murdered around him under his command, and he was completely unaware." So they said, "Well, if you don't like what we're saying, do your own research." So I said, fine. I went ahead. I hired an American PhD based in Lithuania and a second academic to do the research. We actually found about 100 documents that prove conclusively that Naureke was a mass genocidal murderer. And then we were pursuing the case.
Before you go on, I just have a quick question. So you said you started with Jonas and Naureke 2011. Your court cases are going up until now. So it's been almost 10 years of court cases that you've had with Lithuania. Just to kind of put this all in context, in Europe, in Eastern European countries, there had been an ongoing trend in other countries to pass these so-called Holocaust laws. I believe starting in 2010, I think Hungary, Latvia had done, Ukraine. Were you aware of this kind of trend happening in Eastern Europe while you were pursuing your research and your court cases?
I was aware of it peripherally. I have focused entirely on Lithuania. I have not reviewed the other countries, but I know what's going on in some of the other countries. And look, the Americans went into Germany right after the war, and they did what was called denazification. And Germany had no ability to really lie anymore. The judges in Germany were still Nazis. It went on for decades. It was only in the late 80s that Germany truly started coming clean. the Lithuania and the Eastern European countries were occupied by the Soviet Union, and all discourse was shut down. So it was only upon liberation in 1990 that they were able to start discussing. And as Sylvia will be able to tell you, they needed heroes. They needed to build the narrative of the country in order to coalesce the people for nation building. So they made heroes. And having murdered Jews was no impediment to being a hero, because the Jews were all dead. Nobody was going to come back. Nobody needed to tell the truth. They could cleanse the nation, revise the history, and it could be this gleaming story presented to the whole world of major heroism without having to address any culpability. So this was all quite deliberate. They never thought anybody would, here's this troublesome Jew that's asking questions. Who in their right mind would think that somebody's going to come from the United States 75 years after the events and start asking questions when they don't speak the language, they haven't lived there, it's a very remote possibility. They didn't expect this. And so they still don't know how to deal with it. And they've never given themselves a path to tell the truth. In fact, what they've done with all of these court cases is they've backed themselves into such a corner that for them to now tell the truth is actually quite impossible. It's a problem that they have. We know who murdered our families. Our families are dead. They're not coming back. And all we can ask for is tell the truth about who did the murders. So, introducing Sylvia, I knew who Sylvia was. I had trolled Sylvia, and I had read some of her writing, and I thought, this is one horrible woman. She had written articles about this great hero, Jonas Naureke, that was this glorious warrior for Lithuania that wouldn't have hurt a butterfly. And I thought, you know what, I just don't, this woman it's not her fault. I don't believe in generational guilt. It was her grandfather that did it, not her. So I didn't make contact with her. I didn't pursue her any further. And I'm deep in all of these lawsuits. It's consuming unbelievable amounts of my time. And one day I'm sitting at my desk at work, and I've told Sylvia the story before, and this email pops up on my computer, and it says, "Hello, Mr. Gochin. My name is Sylvia Foti. I assume you know who I am." And my hands started shaking like this, and I broke out into a sweat. I started having palpitations. I cannot tell you the physical reaction I had to this. And she says, "I assume you know who I am, and I would like to talk to you, please. If you're willing to talk to me, would you talk to me?" And I was just sitting there in absolute shock. The phone was ringing, the emails were coming. I was just sitting and so I replied to her and I said, "You know what, I need some time." Because I needed to take myself down a few notches to be able to talk to her. And we set up a time a few days later. And I thought, you know what, I'm not even going to spend a penny on dialing this woman. She can call me. So the phone rings and she says, "Hello, Mr. Gochin." And I'm like, "Yeah." She says, "I've read all of your research," because I made all of my research public. So I said, "Yes." She says, "I want to tell you that I agree with all of your research, except you've made one big mistake. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, yeah, what mistake are you going to tell me I made? So I said, what? She said, you've missed approximately 10,000 of my grandfather's victims. And like that, all the defenses went down. And then she says to me, I've been researching my grandfather for 20 years. So her horrible articles that she had written were before she started doing the research. She says, I've been researching my grandfather for 20 years. She said, and I've written a book. Would you like to read it? So I was like, yeah, I'd be very interested to read it. Still very suspicious of who she is and why she's contacting me. And so she emailed me her book, and I sat down on the sofa in my living room and I started reading. And I did not get up from the sofa until I'd finished reading her book. And by the time I finished reading her book, every defense had been removed. She went in as an investigative journalist and peeled back the layers one by one by one. She has devastatingly exposed Lithuania's Holocaust denial strategy. Sylvia, you want to take it from here?
I'm going to say, Sylvia, why don't you kind of jump in and tell us how did you get started with this? I mean, Grant kind of brought us up to how you two had interacted and connected, but fill us in on that road for you getting to that point.
Sure. You know, I was born in Chicago, and my parents came here as children. My father left. He was 9 years old. My mother was 4 years old. So they met here in Chicago. But they, like all good Lithuanians, you know, they were very nationalistic, and they raised my brother and me in the language of Lithuanian. And I went to kindergarten, not even speaking English yet. And throughout my childhood and my teenage years, I always heard about my grandfather, Jonas. What a wonderful World War II hero he was. And my grandmother spoke about him as well, his wife, my mother's mother. And, you know, he was this amazing person and had accomplished so much for the good of Lithuania. And I was just so proud of him. In 1941, he led an uprising against the communists. This 5-day uprising, he won. They won. And then during the Nazi occupation, he was appointed as chief district of Šiauliai. And he did this as a nationalist to take care of the Lithuanians while he was working for the Nazis, but he was really this anti-Nazi all along the way. And because he was such a fervent anti-Nazi, they sent him to the Stutthof concentration camp for 2 years, where he was tortured and treated horribly. And then when the Soviets won the war, he was released. And then he got conscripted by the Russians to join the Russian army. And then after that, he went back to Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania, and he formed another rebellion against the communists, announced 1946. But the KGB caught him. And the KGB brought him to prison. And they tortured him. And they executed him. They shot him in the head. And he was just 36 years old. And he left behind a wife and a daughter, who was my mother and my grandmother. And my mother in the 1970s had been asked to write a biography of her wonderful father. And so she had started to collect all kinds of material on him. So since the 1970s, I've been, watching my mother collect material on this major hero, not just in my family, but in a nation. And, at this time, the country was still occupied by the communists. So the whole Lithuanian community is just devastated and still struggling, the loss of our homeland, and, they killed my grandfather. So my mother was working on this book. In the year 2000, she got sick again. She had always been struggling with diabetes and back pain, and she was 60 years old, and she landed in the hospital again. And I thought it was another routine thing. She had been in the hospital once every 2 years, it seemed, for something or other. And she always came out, and everything would be fine. But I went to visit her, and she looked really bad. She was really, really bad. And I was very concerned. And I came to her, and she took my hand, and she said, "Sylvia, you have to write the book." And of course, it was crystal clear what book she was talking about. And I said, no. You're going to come out of the hospital, and you're going to be fine. You're going to finish this book. This is your life's work. And she said, "Promise me you have to do it. Everybody's expecting this book." And so I'm holding her hand, and I'm looking out the window, and it's a cold January day in Chicago. It's snowing. I think there was a foot of snow. And I'm just staring out the window, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And then I made a deal with God. And I said, how about I say yes, but she's going to be okay, and she's still going to write the book. Deal? Deal. Well, you know how these deals go with God. So I said yes to her, and she closed her eyes and fell asleep. And then I went back home, and then I came back the next day to visit her, and she was in a coma. And within 2 weeks, she had died. So of course it was a surprise. It was a shock to all of us. We didn't really, she was only 60 years old. I expected her to live at least another 20 years. So I was grieving. And slowly, I went back to the house where I grew up. She had converted my old bedroom into her studio, and had started to slowly bring over the material that she had collected on him. And for me, this was a really nice process. By this point, I was thinking, I'm missing my mother. Maybe this is a nice way to kind of connect with her. I'm going to get to know my grandfather better. I'm going to help Lithuania. I'm going to reconnect with my roots. So I was beginning to embrace this project. And she had just brought over so much material, 3,000 pages of KGB transcripts from when my grandfather was interrogated by the KGB. Say what you will about the Soviets, they record everything. And so that was just a big treasure load. When he was in Stutthof, he wrote 77 letters to my grandmother, beautiful love letters. And he wrote a fairy tale to my mother, gorgeous fairy tale. And just, all kinds of articles from magazines and newspapers that had been written about my grandfather. So I brought everything over. It's all right here behind me now. And I started, kind of going through it. And so now it's July 2000. And my
So can I ask you a quick question before you?
Yes,
of
course.
So at what point in your life was the first mention of the book?
1970s.
And so you kind of fast forwarded to 2000 or so, when your mother, or was it your grandmother or your mother who was getting sick?
My mother.
Your mother?
His daughter.
So between the 70s and 2000, a lot happened in the world, and the Soviet Union collapsed. What was your relationship with, before you kind of go on to your personal story, what was your personal relationship with Lithuania? Had you gone to Lithuania at that period of time? Had you had any interaction?
No, I went to Saturday school, Lithuanian Saturday school. I was in a lot of Lithuanian organizations. I went to Lithuanian summer camps in Michigan here, in Vermont.
But you had a positive perception of your grandfather. You had this positive
everywhere.
And then after the Soviet Union collapsed, did you go to Lithuania?
My mom went. I went there in '89, and then '97. And I went with my mom because she was an opera singer, and she was singing concerts there for them already, and she was collecting material for her book. So I was kind of like tagging along and getting to know my heritage homeland and
how were you treated by the Lithuanian government? Were you welcomed as
very much so, very warmly. The granddaughter of Jonas Naureke was treated very well.
Okay, that's what I wanted to understand. Okay.
Yeah. So now we're in July 2000, and my grandmother had another heart attack. This was like her fourth or fifth one. She was in her 80s already, and I went to visit her, and she had survived my mother by 5 months, and of course she was devastated that her daughter had died. But anyway, I come visit her, and how are you doing? How are things? And she looked at me and said, "How's the book?" And I said, it's going, I'm going to get through it. I was 38 years old at the time. And I said, I'm young. I'm going to get it done. Don't worry. I'm not going to let it go like mom did. Don't worry. I'm going to do it. And she took my hand and she said, "Don't write the book." And I said, "What?" And she said, "Just let history lie. There's no need to dig around in there." And I said, "What are you saying? I already promised mom. I have to do this. Of course I'm going to write the book." And she did not like my answer. And so she just turned over. She was in bed and she just turned over and faced the wall and kind of turned her back to me. And I said, "Goodbye." And then I came back, about a week later. And by this point, she was in a coma. And then she died. And both of them, my mother and my grandmother, had asked to be buried in Lithuania. And so my brother and I, they were cremated. So my brother and I took their cremains to Lithuania in October 2000. And we buried them. And a lot of people came to visit the relatives of Jonas Naureke, aka General Storm. His code name was General Storm. And then after that, my brother and I were invited to visit the school named after my grandfather. It's the Jonas Naureke Grammar School in Heroine, which is in northern Lithuania. And we are greeted, all the children are holding flowers and they're singing, the Lithuanian song. And, we're just greeted so warmly. And, I was just so touched by the whole thing. And then the director brings us to his office and all the teachers are standing around and, saying hello, and we're getting to know them. And then the director brings me over to see this big scrapbook about my grandfather, and I'm kind of like leafing through the pages. And he said, "I heard you're writing the book." I said, "Yes." He said, "You're a good daughter to take this project over from your mother." I said, thank you. He said, yes, our country needs heroes. So it's very, very important that you're writing this book, and I'm so pleased that you're doing it. And I said, you know, as long as I'm here, why don't you tell me how you named the school after my grandfather? And he said, well, you know, before it was this horrible Russian name, and we had to get rid of that terrible name, and we had to give it a good Lithuanian name. And your grandfather was born in this town, so his name came up right away, and it was a natural. And I said, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I thought that would be the end of the story. And then he takes me and my brother kind of to the side, and he says, but you know, I got a lot of grief over naming the school after your grandfather. And I said, what do you mean you got a lot of grief? He said, because of what the Jews were saying. And I said, what could the Jews possibly say about my grandfather? And he looked at me like I'm the one from Mars. And he said, well, he was accused of killing Jews. And I said, what? And I almost went into shock, and my heart was racing, and, you know, I almost fainted. They had to give me a seat, and I'm sitting down, and the director's like, but don't worry. It's, you know, that's in the past. All of that is over now. So, it's okay. So he's trying to soothe me, and I'm like trying to, you know, I'm drinking a glass of water and like trying to get back into it. And then I came back to Chicago, and I started asking my relatives, my friends, did you hear the story about Jonas Naureke killing Jews? And I was shocked how many of them had heard this. And I said, how come nobody ever told me anything about this? Well, it's just communist propaganda. Why would anybody talk about this with you? And I'm like, what? Yeah, it's just a made up story. You don't have to believe it. You know, the communists, they just, you know, they're upset Lithuania has its independence and it's a free country again. And they don't want Lithuania to have their heroes, to build a nation. So they're just making this up. And I thought, oh, okay. So, so I very slowly started my research, kind of relieved that this is not a true story. And, you know, I was doing this on the side. I was still a working journalist, and I had 2 young children then. And so this was a very, very slow thing for me. But it was always there at the back of my head. You know, like at some point I thought, I'm going to exonerate him. I'm going to prove how innocent he is, what a good man he was, that this is just crazy. It's not true. And I'm going to make that part of my story. So I had gotten to that point because I knew I couldn't ignore it. As a journalist, I just couldn't completely ignore it. So I knew I had to address it somehow. And the way I was going to address it was to prove it wrong. And so anyway, about 10 years passed, and I had gotten through a lot of the material. And it was at about the 10-year mark where I came across this brochure that my grandfather had written. And it was hidden in between these unlikely other documents, you know, as if like it didn't belong where it was. It wasn't where, like I thought it might have belonged. So,
what year is this?
How?
What year is this?
I found this brochure in 2010.
2010. Okay, so right about when Grant is about to start his lawsuits. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I went through 10 years of all his good stuff. I went through the KGB transcripts. I translated his fairy tale. I went through the beautiful love letters. So I went through all the heroic stuff. And so anyway, this brochure is called "Raise Your Head, Lithuanian," and it was written in 1933. And he had already been part of the army, the Lithuanian army. And it was 32 pages, and it was basically a rant against the foreigners in Lithuania. how they took over the whole country, and how Lithuanians need to get Lithuania back for Lithuanians. And these foreigners are, of course, the Jews. And it's not fair. They took over the businesses. They have all the money. They have all the professions. We need to stop buying any products from Jews. We need to, support only Lithuanians. If you have a choice to buy a product from a Jew or Lithuanian, please don't buy it from the Jew. Buy it from the Lithuanian. So
this is your grandfather.
Yeah, this is my grandfather.
And how old was he when he wrote this? Do you know?
22.
At age 22. Wow. And Rabbi Egger, just when we hear that kind of content is created in Lithuania by a 22-year-old Lithuanian, right. I mean, it really echoes across all aspects of the lead up to the Holocaust, right?
Right. It's exactly what we hear from other countries, other stories, and what we sadly continue to hear today, both the right and the left today. Look at what's been going on Twitter just in this last 2 days with certain people in Britain and rappers and same kind of information, same kind of lies.
Absolutely. Sorry, Sylvia, go ahead.
No, that's fine. So that was my first sort of turning point where I thought, okay, this is terrible. This is going to make it really difficult for me to exonerate him now. And as his granddaughter, I wanted to burn the thing and just get rid of the evidence. But the journalist in me didn't. And so I held on to it, but that was where I really sort of said, okay, now I have to really dig here. And so that was sort of the beginning of the story. And then from there, I started finding more and more and more, and was becoming more and more devastated.
And tell us how you, from your perspective, came to know Grant. And by know Grant, I mean just when you first became aware of him to actually meeting him. What was that process for you?
Okay, so it took me another 8 years. Well, I had gone to Lithuania and I did my own research, and I talked to a lot of experts there, and historians and family members, and as much of his life together as I could. And then it still took me another 5 years because, again, I'm still doing this on the side. So 2018, the book is finally finished, and I need an agent. I need to find a literary agent because my goal was to get this published by a real publisher. Like, I didn't want to self-publish. And so everybody, I found out that I have to get what is called an author platform. I'm like, okay, so it wasn't enough that I wrote a book. No. So then I was advised to create a website. So I created this website, and within the website I put up finally by March 2018. And literally within days, maybe 1 or 2 days, this researcher from Lithuania, a PhD, who was an American, whose name is Andrius Kulikauskas, sends me an email, and he says, I am a researcher working for a man by the name of Grant Gochin, and he is launching a lawsuit against the Genocide Center about your grandfather. And I almost fell off my chair. And I said, what? You got to be kidding me. What is this? I thought I had like this little tiny family story. I mean, I knew it was going to be big, like with Lithuanians and stuff, but a lawsuit. And then Andrew says, you should meet Grant. And I'm like, oh my gosh. And so it took me 6 weeks to gather my courage to contact Grant, because I thought he's Jewish and he's gonna hate me. My grandfather, killed Jews in Lithuania. What does he want to do with me? Why is Andres making me do this? And but but then I finally, you know, I finally decided that who am I writing this book for if it's not for people like Grant?
And to be clear, at this point, you had done your research. You had found the comprehensive evidence beyond the pamphlet. You found other things that clarified for you, at least, what your grandfather's role was with Jews in Lithuania.
Yeah, I found a lot. I mean, the book was done. The book was pretty much, the book was done. So, you know, I'm ready to find a literary agent and I'm ready to publish this. And that was all I thought I was going to do.
But now you're carrying, and you as the granddaughter, you're carrying this history that you know is true because you've seen the research, you've seen the records.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yes. So,
Sylvia and Grant, well, I'm curious though, like, so now, so you had this like powerful first meeting. Grant read your book about your grandfather. You had put so much, Sylvia, into this book to try and figure out this story that you didn't know, right? That had been really hidden from you, even though others in your family. Now, this is 2020, 2 years later, and the two of you have done such work together to try and uncover truth. That's what you did with your book with your grandfather, Grant. That's what you've been trying to do and holding the Lithuanian government accountable. How has your relationship together over this course of time affected two of you? Like, I'm curious about, you know, you started, both of you just said you were both scared to kind of interact with other, and now your work is parallel to each other.
Sylvia, do you want to answer first?
Sure. You know, from that first phone conversation, which by the way was on April 20th, and wow. I don't know if anybody in the audience understands the significance of April 20th and the irony of April 20th and the fact that Grant and I first connected on April 20th. April 20th is Hitler's birthday. So, since then, we have been pretty much in daily contact. You know, until that moment, I was so isolated and so alone and, you know, just carrying this entire load, psychological load, all by myself, and terrified and worried and stressed and just overloaded. And strangely, when I connected with Grant, it's like everything was cut in half. The emotional load was cut in half because now I could share it. And he had the, you know, in a weird way, because of his lawsuits, he had the exact sort of same mission that I did. And strangely, me trying to write the book and him trying to have these lawsuits finished, we found each other like on the exact same side, doing the exact same thing. And you know, I shared my research with him, and he shared his research with me. And then he generously offered to put all his research on my website, saying that, you know, since I'm the granddaughter, it'll have a better effect. And so we just started sharing everything together like that. And then I knew that I had to get a story out. And really, I'm still like worried about attracting a literary agent. That was my only goal at that point. And you know, for this author platform that we authors have to get now. And so I finally got an article out, and now Grant was part of the story, because I met him in April and that article came out in July, and already the story's changing because of Grant. And now it's like this combination of forces working together. And when that story came out on salon.com, everything exploded. from that moment on, everything exploded.
So let me answer this from my perspective.
Yes, please.
I've been banging this drum for 3 decades, and I've been in complete isolation. I was one man banging a drum on his own, attracting no attention. And I had no outside support. I until Dylan stepped up. Dylan's the first institutional support that I've had, and he really has. He's done a remarkable job in taking us to the next level. And then Sylvia contacted me. Before Sylvia contacted me, it was a non-story. When Sylvia contacted me, it was the granddaughter of the murderer standing next to the grandson of some of his victims, both coming up with the same conclusion, both pointing a finger at the Lithuanian government as outright Holocaust revisionists. When Sylvia told me, you've missed 10,000 of my grandfather's victims, my defenses crumbled. When I read her book, every defense crumbled. I cannot wait for this book to come out. It is an absolute revelation. Sylvia said to me when I spoke to her, she said, I think this is the greatest cover-up of the 20th century. What Sylvia didn't know at that time was, I think I have a dozen genocidal mass murderers on my list that Lithuania has made international heroes. It's so common that I actually asked the question, was murdering Jews a criteria for Lithuanian national honors? And when Sylvia crumbled my defenses, and I finally had somebody next to me that understood, that saw the data and understood the pain, I will tell you that Sylvia and I have become such close friends. We talk all the time. We have, the commonality is just unbelievable. If you consider that her family and my family started in the same shtetl 100 years ago, and now her brother's in Los Angeles and I'm in Los Angeles. The family started in the same place, ended in the same place, and in between, her family murdered all of mine. So, what a journey. But we've become really good, close, trusting, good friends. And we're a team now. And it's, after 30 years, I have a team. And it's a really good feeling.
So it also speaks to the idea that we have to, the speaking truth to power, which is what both of you are doing. And in particular with this notion, with the Holocaust denial that's just rampant, as you've uncovered in Lithuania, but it's happening, neighboring Poland and Hungary. It's happening all over again.
Yes.
Even as Germany had made so many strides towards reconciliation and programs of that, it's creeping up again there. And it's certainly creeping up here in the United States. How else can we learn from the work that the two of you have done and are doing and continuing to do, as the lawsuits are still happening, Grant, to combat this twisting of the truth of what happened? Is there something that you can tell all of us who are here tonight, how to engage in that fight with you?
It's interesting, Rabbi. You were a warrior for gay rights like very few others in the world, and there were a number of people that brought about equality. What Sylvia's and my story shows is that one person can take on an entire government, and if a person is passionate enough, then they can bring truth to power. So the amount of fact revisionism that's going on in our country now, throughout the world, we have to be vigilant. When you have something like Holocaust denial or denial of human rights violations, if truth isn't told, it can lead into a repeat. First of all, you're denying the victimhood of the victims. You're denying the entire factual basis of what happened, and you are laying the groundwork for a repeat scenario. There are so many genocides happening in the world today, and you don't see them in the news. And much of that is because governments have so successfully covered up previous genocides. If you look at the genocide of the Armenians in 1915, Adolf Hitler said, "Who remembers the Armenians?" So if nobody remembers killing all the Armenians, we can kill all the Jews. If nobody knows that the Uyghurs in China are being genocided, China can continue along their merry path. We have to expose the facts about history, about current events, and learn the lessons so they're not repeated. Otherwise, we'll never be able to progress in society.
And so, Grant, can you talk specifically about how you've done that, and how even together how we've done that? I think, Sylvia, the first time you and I met, do you remember where it was? I don't remember when it was. Was it a year ago? A little over a year ago?
Yeah, the summer of 2019.
And where was it? Do you remember?
Hollywood.
West Hollywood.
Yes.
Hollywood.
That's right. Yes.
West Hollywood City Hall.
That's right.
And you were honored by the city council there for your work. And from our standpoint, that was a great way to get an important city like West Hollywood, which was our audience here tonight, to become aware of this issue, not just for historical purposes, but for future purposes. Grant, as you said, genocide is happening around the world. Anti-Semitism is on the rise. If government crimes are allowed to persist and not and to be covered up without question, in the past, it sets the same precedent for the future. And Grant, you've been honored by other cities as well, I think, in America. Can you list them off the top of your head?
The most recent was the city of Beverly Hills.
It's an important city.
And it's a big city. It's an important city. And the city of Beverly Hills passed a resolution condemning Lithuania for Holocaust revisionism. In fact, there have been, Sylvia's and my work has been brought to the attention. Sylvia's first article in Salon.com really made a huge international impact. Both of us have faced horrible intimidation from the Lithuanian government as a result. We've both faced incredible hostility, but I think we both have broad shoulders and we can sustain it. So when a city like West Hollywood honors Sylvia, it shows that a city like West Hollywood is standing up for the values of civil rights, freedom, and equality. When a country like Lithuania is taking the murderer of about 14,500 Jews and saying, well, this is our national hero. Let's ask the question. If some Russian came into Lithuania tomorrow and murdered 14,500 Lithuanians, would Lithuania honor them as a national hero? So clearly it's about them being Jews. When a country displays these kind of values and says, okay, our Jewish citizens or our gay citizens are dispensable and we can kill them, and that doesn't stop the heroization process, it's reflective of national values. Now, I absolutely do not want to impugn ordinary Lithuanians. The majority of Lithuanians are really decent, fine people. that are horrified by what is being done in their name, that they would love to see this all come to an end, these honors revoked, truth be told. But the intimidation that Sylvia and I have faced, the full strength of the Lithuanian government coming against us, ordinary Lithuanians face it as well. So if ordinary Lithuanians speak out, a friend of mine was fired from his job on the city of Vilnius for saying, well, we should look at this honestly. I mean, he didn't go into specifics. And for making that statement, he was fired. Ordinary Lithuanians are intimidated as well. So we cannot blame ordinary Lithuanians. Like I said, most of them are really decent people.
So we are a bit past the top of the hour, and as usual, we've actually kept a pretty good audience and kept the story moving. But I want to kind of start to think about what do we hope to see happen. And Rabbi, I want to keep and be cognizant of our time and the time for the program tonight. But I just want to, Grant, you mentioned Beverly Hills, being honored by Beverly Hills, and Sylvia honored by the city of West Hollywood. I think also city of Los Angeles. Many cities have honored
Yes.
the work that you all have done. I want to pull up, if I can, a recent comment from the State Department, just to kind of close this out here, just to kind of show the practical effect of the work that you have done here. So let's see if I can pull this up here. 1 second. No, that's not the right one. Hold on, guys. 1 second. Okay, let's do this one. All right, and so you can see this now. So this is Sherry Daniels from the U.S. State Department, who is quoted as saying, and this is, by the way, this is not old. This is new. This is
last week or the week before.
Last week, yeah.
Last week, yeah. She says, quote, "This is a call to action to stand up against rehabilitation of those who participated directly or indirectly in the crimes of the Holocaust or genocide of the Roma." And again, this is Sherry Daniels. She's a special envoy for Holocaust issues at the U.S. Department of State. Grant and Sylvia, when you see this, bearing in mind the work that you have done and the recent work that you have done to really raise awareness over the past year, how does this make you feel? What does this evoke for you?
Okay, so the IHRA is the most authoritative body in the world on Holocaust issues. It's an association of governments, and they've only issued 3 proclamations in the history of the organization, and this is one of them. So this is beyond relevant. The IHRA last year or the year before came out with a statement condemning the Lithuanian government for Holocaust revisionism, particularly on Sylvia's grandfather. During the process of exposing Sylvia's grandfather and what the Lithuanian government has done, we've also exposed how they misused US congressional documents to revise Holocaust history on other Holocaust perpetrators. When you see things like this, it cannot be more validating. They didn't mention Lithuania in this, but it is clear to everybody in the world that is aware of this, that Lithuania was a focal point of this resolution. What Sylvia and I have managed to do is to bring a full-scale government agenda to the world's attention. And even though I don't believe I will ever succeed in achieving truth in Lithuania, the world now knows who murdered my relatives, how it was done, and the government of Lithuania has been identified for their value statement.
And I think just just to really highlight here, it says this is a call to action. So Sylvia, how does that make you feel about this? Is an official at the U.S. Department of State basically saying we need to keep going on this.
You know, I am just so amazed and even overwhelmed emotionally, because I really just did this as a promise to my mother to write this story. And that's all I meant to do, was to keep my promise. And for it to have grown to this level, you know, to me, you know, I'm a practicing Catholic, and I believe in God. And I you know, I just have to say that there is a guiding hand in this. There is an invisible force that wants this to come out. And I believe that it will. This just gives me so much hope that it really will.
All right. So go, Robert.
No, I was just going to say, you know, and we're the two of you have joined forces to speak this truth to power, who are actively engaged in trying to snuff out the truth of history and what happened, and not only to the Jews, but to all of the other different groups that were singled out in Nazi Europe, right? Whether it was the Jews or the Roma or those with disabilities. And it is so important for, as you said, Grant, to learn the lessons for the times we're living on. Because if we only cover up the past, we are doomed to repeat it. And we've seen that happen time and again already since World War II. And we need to take note of what's going on in our current world right here and now in 2020. As you point out, not only in China, but perhaps there's some things going on right here under our own noses, with children still in cages, and accusations against different groups, and pitting one ethnic group or racial group against another. So the work the two of you are doing, while it is focused on Lithuania and the horrors that happened there in the time of World War II, and focused in, as you said, Grant, on understanding this relationship between Sylvia's relatives and your relatives. It is really a story that is much bigger than two families or one country. And we're so appreciative of the work that you're doing, and how you're teaching us to speak this truth, and to give voice to the pain that it must cause you, Sylvia, to realize this was your family. And the pain, Grant, as we've known each other for many, many years now together, the pain I know of the loss that you have and the traumas that were passed on to you by the suffering in your families. But to now find healing in each other is actually a message of hope for all of us. And so we're so grateful and thankful for the work, and hope that the strength that you find in each other will be strengthened by your continued work together, and that we can join forces to help you in this process.
Thank you, Rabbi.
So why don't we go ahead and close it out. I do want to make a quick comment, Rabbi Egger. One of your congregants, John D'Amico, former mayor of West Hollywood, current immediate past former mayor of West Hollywood, and current city council member, sent me a note, and he has been watching, and he is fascinated by the story, and thanks you, Grant and Sylvia, for sharing your story. I do want to make a quick note here. Let's see here. Dale Apple had asked, is there anything we can do to help? So what I want to do is I want to go ahead and share with you very quickly as we close out here, and we let Rabbi Chaikin and Rabbi Edgar continue the Tisha B'Av here. So we have since our last event, we have set up a landing page. So I want you, all of the viewers here, you can see this at israelusa.org/Holocaust. We talk about Lithuania. We emphasize Lithuania here. As we mentioned earlier in the program, there has been a trend historically over the past 10 years of Eastern European governments seeking to revise history for various reasons. We highlight Grant and Sylvia here. On this page, you'll also see our council of advisors that we have put together. We're always welcoming more, so if there's interest, please reach out to us, and we'd be happy to to expand this Council of Advisors on the Prevention of Holocaust Denial and Distortion. Please sign up, subscribe, and stay informed about European Holocaust denial. And here you'll be able to see a recording of tonight's event. And most importantly, and Grant wouldn't let me go without saying this, all of the work that we do costs money here at ICANN. And if you are able to support us, please visit this page. There is a campaign set up here. Any amount helps. So as we say here, never again is now. And your support would be generously received and grateful.
May I say something, Dylan, please?
Yes, absolutely.
ICANN was in 30 years of standing up against the Lithuanian government. ICANN is the first institution that has come to my assistance. Dylan's work has taken this to a whole new level. I want to publicly acknowledge ICANN and the work of Dylan Hosier and encourage you to support him. I'd also like to say Sylvia's book is coming out in May 2021, and it's compelling. If I tell you that, you know, even if it wasn't about the subject that I'm that passionate about, I would have sat down and still read it cover to cover in one sitting. She is a phenomenal author, and that is going to be an extraordinary book. So when it's issued, I encourage you to read it.
Okay, Sylvia, you're coming back. We're doing a book interview when the book comes out.
Awesome.
Okay?
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to definitely do that together because there's more to this story than we could
Yes.
share with all of you tonight, and more that we can do to join together with forces and support the work that Grant and Sylvia are doing, and understand how the distortion of truth is something that is a serious issue, particularly when it comes to Holocaust denial.
And Rabbi,
thank you so much
for giving. Thank you so much for giving us this platform and allowing us to tell our story. If people don't know, countries like Lithuania will get away with it. And so thank you to you and to Kolomi for allowing us to tell the story.
We're proud of the work that you do, Grant and Sylvia, and we always enjoy partnering with ICANN and Dylan's work because this is really important. I took a group to Poland last summer. We met with LGBTQ activists in Poland. We met with Jewish community in Poland. And we can see what's creeping and happening there as well, with the same kind of story, Sylvia, that you share about your grandfather. The denial there is as big as well and continues to be. And so it's something that we see here in our own country, in the United States, we see happening in Europe, and we together, I know, will continue to speak truth to power. We're going to close our evening, since it is the 9th of Av, this day of remembering communal tragedy. Even as we end, we read just a word from the book of Lamentations in the Bible, which marks the destruction of the first temple. But we think about all of these tragedies that has befallen our people as a way to learn how to be resilient and how to rise up and to be strong once again, which is what your work is teaching us. And the last verses of the book of Lamentation says, "Because of this our hearts are sick, because of this our eyes are dimmed, because of Mount Zion which lies desolate, jackals howl. But you, God, are enthroned forever. Your throne endures through the ages. Why you've forgotten us utterly and forsaken us for time. Take us back, God, to yourself, and let us come back and renew us as our days of old. For truly you rejected us, bitterly raged against us. But you shall take us back, God, to yourself, to let us come back and renew our days of old."
We'll close with the song Elia, Elia, the words of Assanish, the pre-Israeli state heroine who helped save some of her European siblings and helped parachute in to Holocaust Nazi territory to try and save lives. The work you are doing, Grant and Sylvia, is also work of saving lives and saving memories. And we hope that that truth is one of those things that never ends, that we pray for in this prayer. Eli, Eli, shelo yigamer leolam, hachol v'hayam, rishrush shel hamayim, v'rak hashamayim, tfilat adam. Hachol v'hayam, rishrush shel hamayim, v'rak hashamayim, tfilat adam. Oh God, my God, I pray that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the water, the crash of the heaven, the prayer of the heart, the sand and the sea, the rush of the water, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart.
We thank you all for being with us. Grant, Sylvia, Rabbi Chaikin, as always, Dylan. I'm grateful to you at the Israel American Civic Action Network. And join us at Congregation Kol Ami online, kol-ami.org, for more programs like this of learning and empowerment.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Grant. Thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.